YouTube, welcome back. This is the fourth and final segment in my YouTube series I've called Creating a Simple Database Using Java. As I promised, this fourth segment is going to incorporate the things we learned from the first three segments. So if you recall, last time we set up a class called user. The time before that we created a validate username method. And in the very first segment we created a validate password method. So all three of these methods are going to be incorporated inside of this final class, which is called the driver class. And what this is going to do is basically get user input and allow users to add, delete, view, and exit the database. So a few things you need to do before you get started here is inside of this driver class, I have copied and pasted two of the methods that we created in the first two segments of this video series. So you see the first segment here, or first method here, is the user check method. This is from the second segment in the series, and the code can be found in the video description of that video. And at the very bottom here, we have our pass check method, which is the method that we created in the very first video of this series, and the code can be found in the first video description in this series. And another thing I need to mention is where you decide to save this driver class, make sure it is in the same directory as your user class. And this user class is the class that we created in the third segment of the series, the last segment that we did. Make sure that your user class right here, user.java, is in the same directory as this driver class, or else this driver isn't going to work properly. Alright, with all that aside, I think we're ready to get started. This portion of the program is a little more complicated than the first three portions that we went through together, so I'm going to do my best to explain this, and we'll start up top like we always do with the description. So this program uses a driver class to get a user command from the keyboard. The following commands are valid and will produce the corresponding results. So you have add, which allows the user to add a new user to the database by providing a valid username and password. You have delete, which allows the user to delete a user in the database, assuming the username has already been previously added. A view command, which displays a list of users currently in the database. And an exit command that allows the users to exit the program. As I mentioned, this driver class uses previously developed methods, validate password, validate user, to verify that all user inputs are valid. And it also uses an array list to store a list of users. Valid users have a username and a password, and as I mentioned, the user class must be stored in the same directory as the driver class. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the syntax behind this driver. Again, I start by just importing java.util, and this just imports the scanner to get the keyboard inputs, and also it imports array list, which we use to store users. We have our main method here, string command, which is used to get the commands from the keyboard that the user enters, and that starts off as being an empty string. Username, which is also empty. Password starts off as being an empty string. An array list that holds type user called data. And then we just have our scanner, which just gets the system in, so that's just keyboard input. So we start off by saying, while the command entered by the user does not equal exit, we print to the screen, please enter a command or type exit. And then we get the command as the next input. So what we say here is if the command equals add, then print username, grab the username, print password to the screen, and grab that password. And if we use this user check method, this is the one we developed in the second segment, username dot equals valid username, and pass check, this is the one we developed in the first segment of the series. We call that on password dot equals valid password. So this is if the username is valid and the password is valid, then we create a new user called valid user, and we use that constructor that we created in the user class. We add the username and the password, and then we add that user to our array list data, and we inform the user of the system that that was successful, and we just print a blank line. And if it's not a valid username or password, we respond by saying that's not a valid username or password. So that's basically how you go about adding new users to that array list. You run through and make sure their username is valid, their password is valid, If they are, you add them into that array list, that data array list, and then they're a valid user and they're stored in there, and then you inform the user of the program that that was a successful addition. Otherwise, you tell them it wasn't a valid username or a password. So if the user types in view, we're going to go ahead and run through that data if data.size equals 0. So this means that there's no users in the system. We just let them know there's currently no users in the database. Else you display a list of the current users. So we have a for loop here starting at 0. It runs through data.size, and we print to the screen data.getX. So that would be where you are in that data loop. And we use that toString method, and that's inside that user class. If you remember, it's the very last method inside of that user class. And that's going to print to the screen the username followed by the password. And then you just print a blank line. If the command entered by the user is delete, you create this boolean here, found, and set it to false. You ask for a username. You grab the username that the user inputs, and then you use this user check method. If the username that the user entered is a valid username, then you start looking for whether or not it exists inside of the database. So you go through the database, the list of the usernames in the database, and if it's found, you remove it, and you set found equal to true. You let the user know that the deletion was successful. Otherwise, if they enter a username that's not valid, then you let them know it's not a valid username, but you still set found equal to true because you still technically found a result. And then finally, if found is false, that means that it was a valid email that they entered, but it didn't exist in the database. You just let the user know that the user does not exist, and then you print a blank line. So I know that seems like a lot to handle, but once you actually copy and paste this code and spend a little time looking at it, it's actually not as complicated as it seems. And I'll go ahead and run through a test here so you can see, and hopefully this will help clear up what this is supposed to look like. So compile it, and we'll go ahead and run it. So please enter a command or type exit. So we'll start off by viewing what's in the database. We'll type view. There's currently no users, so let's add one. Type add username. So has to be a valid username. Remember the requirements for a valid username. Has to have an @ symbol, has to have a period. The period has to come after the @ symbol. Passwords have to have at least 2 capital letters, 2 numbers, and have to be 8 characters long. Successful. Let's add another one. Jerry@gmail.com. Password. Alright, so now we have 2 users in here. Let's go ahead and view these 2 guys. Current users are Tom and Jerry. Let's go ahead and delete one of them. So we'll do a delete. Username. Let's go ahead and delete Tom. Delete was successful. All right, let's see if it actually was. Let's take a view. Current users, we're down to just Jerry now in our database. Let's try to delete a name that doesn't exist. So we'll do delete Willie. There you see it tells you user does not exist. And lastly, the final command is exit. Once you hit exit, you're able just to press any key to continue, and when you hit enter, the program closes. So thank you to everyone who followed through with all 4 segments in this series. I hope you learned something. I hope I was able to help someone out there do something. You know, I think it's interesting stuff. Obviously this isn't very practical, but I think it's a pretty good demonstration, and it's a good start for someone who's new to programming to see how databases are developed. And you know, I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to my channel. One last thing, I'll include the code from this video in the video description again, and I'll replace all the less than and greater than signs with the words like I have been doing in previous videos. And just remember that if you copy and paste the code, to make sure that you change those words to the less than and greater than carets. Alright, that's all. Thanks again for watching.